This show is a member of the Sorgatron Media Podcast Network. Find out more at sorgatronmedia.com. This show is brought to you by IndyWrestling.us. Check out IWC, RWA, and more. And listeners like you, support this show at patreon.com/Wrestling Mayhem Show.
Hungry as fuck, but I ain't starving yet. Chain for the pain, cocktail bar set. Never said I was a gangster or thug, but I'm an animal. Feeding for the taste of the fly.
Hey guys, it is the Indy Mayhem Show. I'm Mike Sorg at Sorgatron on the Twitter. This is the podcast where we talk about and with people in and around independent professional wrestling. Today we're going to have a panel, of course, but in the meantime, please go check out everything at IndyWrestling.us, WrestlingMayhemShow.com, this and other great podcasts, a lot of the archive, a lot of great discussions we've had for the Indy Mayhem Show. And of course, please subscribe over wherever you get your podcasts over at the Indy Mayhem Show on there. And also look at the Wrestling Mayhem Show super feed, where there's a lot of like all the Mayhem shows, the wrestling shows that we do here on the network with Wrestling Mayhem Show. So with us this week, we got a little bit of a panel. Of course, there's let's introduce the panel first. First of all, he's the one of the evil geniuses behind Ryse Wrestling. That's Ryse with a Y, who we'll be talking about today. Marcus Mann, how you doing?
I'm doing all right. Here's what I'm gonna say, Sorg. With everything that's going on in wrestling today, evil might not be the thing that I want associated with my name. Okay. Maybe take that off from now on.
Okay. Okay.
That adjective.
I'm working on my off the cuff comments. I caught myself on the Mayhem Show the other day too, saying something that wasn't fitting for today. Let's say, working on it. We are all trying to do better. With us also, he is the trophy boy, Tyler Klein.
Hello. How's everybody doing?
All right. Oh, you got a swivelly chair and everything. You're just like in full office mode.
I do. I'm on my desktop sort of area, so it's like the camera's not high up, and I'm just like, yeah, not as fashionable today.
And also with us today is Laura Loveless. I believe. Well, no, you've been on the show in person before. First time remote here. How you doing, Laura?
Good.
Awesome.
Happy to be here.
Awesome. So I kind of approached Marcus and Brandon about this idea with everything that's been going on with the Speak Out movement, and of course a lot of other of these big topics over the last week or so, especially in the pro wrestling world. The idea of a safe locker room, I know, has come up a lot on Twitter and about how do we do that in the future. I think today, and I'm hoping to pull it up here during the course of the show, I've seen like a list of things to ensure a safe locker room and welcoming locker room. And if there's anything like with Ryse Wrestling, and we've talked about this multiple times here and there across the shows and everything, like Ryse has seemed to be the most welcoming of locker rooms and actively trying to be the most welcoming of locker rooms there. And Marcus, you've talked about that here on the show. Can you tell us a little bit about that, in kind of that philosophy that happens with Ryse Wrestling?
Well, I appreciate the compliments, and that you feel that way, and I hope that others feel that way about our locker room. Now, having said that, I mean, over the last, week or so, we've all had to come to terms with understanding that no matter how good you think you are, you may not be good enough.
Right.
And that just because you feel like it's a place is doing well doesn't mean it's doing good enough. And that's something that we're working on. But as far as our mottos or what we've tried to do with the locker room, we have tried to be as welcoming as possible. We have tried to make sure that everyone felt comfortable in our locker room or comfortable coming to management, or if there is any sort of issues, squashing them as soon as possible. That doesn't always mean that everyone is successful. That does not mean that, there's still not work to do. But the concept of Ryse from the beginning, what Brandon wanted was a place for young wrestlers that he saw with a voice that weren't getting to speak out, an ability to do that. And so when you start that company on that kind of motto of, people that haven't really got to be heard, whether they've been young or underutilized or things like that. When you start a company that way, it tends to grow in a way that lets people use their voice for social change or acceptance or things like that as well. So I hope that the company has been perceived that way, and I hope that we can continue that way. But that doesn't mean that it's just like I said, just because things have gone well doesn't mean you're doing everything right.
Gotcha. So from this, when I was preparing for things, I wanted to bring Tyler and Laura on to kind of talk about, like, as members of the locker room that have been in and out of that company, what is it that kind of, what is it that kind of makes Ryse a little more comforting for you guys, versus other locker rooms?
Well, ladies first, if you want to go first, Laura.
Oh, thank you, Tyler.
Sorry.
I would say there is a good amount of not only just camaraderie, but people are generally very friendly. I could tell too from people who are visiting from out of state. Ryse has always had a very welcoming locker room, a very kind of demeanor, and a very professional in the sense that we understand that you're here to work with us and be a performer with us. And I think that really at least for me, as a wrestler, when I'm entering in an environment and I'm not acquainted with, or people whom I've never worked before, it's always a little nerve-wracking because you want to make sure you don't piss off that one person, or you don't want to step on the wrong person's toes. There's really a lack of ego in Ryse in that regard. So it's very easy, I think, to kind of just assimilate into that environment and be very comfortable.
And I mean, I can kind of
Tyler.
I can kind of echo what Laura said. Like, I'm very new to the Pittsburgh area, and Ryse was one of the first places that I actually was able to, go and go back in the locker room. With me, it's always super nerve-wracking going someplace new where you don't know people. I mean, being friends with some of the people who have worked with Ryse, and of course Golden Sheik with Calvin and BC. I knew what I was kind of getting into going there and how great the locker room was, but even so, for somebody who's part of the LGBTQ community, going into new locker rooms, especially if you're out, is really nerve-wracking because sometimes there are, depending on where you go, there are stigmas associated with being LGBTQ. Like, either you're there to be inappropriate, or the only reason you're doing it is for inappropriate reasons, which sucks because that's not what we're about. And I understand at some point I can understand where people's fears come from, because there are, of course, what's going on now, there are plenty of people who are like that, so it has people scared. But like, going into Ryse and being there and just being around everybody, like, I didn't feel that. I felt that other places, not in the Pittsburgh area, of course, but like places I've gone, different states and all that. It's just been, I was afraid to be who I was because of potentially where I was. Like, be quiet, I'm not going to say a word, I'm just going to keep to myself, which sometimes may come off, if you're afraid, may come off as you being like standoffish or not interested in talking to people. But it's more of the fact that I'm a little more nervous about letting people know who I am, and I've never had that feeling at Ryse at all.
So let's talk about a little bit of, of course, it feels like there, and we try to kind of segment this a little bit on the Wrestling Mayhem show this week with Badger and the Speaking Out movement, but there's a lot of the backstage atmosphere, I don't know, unspoken rules, whatever the case may be, is being exposed, for better and worse, in the last week, and that's kind of being, like, it's exploding right in front of the fans, is what I'm trying to say, right? Can we talk a little bit about kind of translate that to the fans that may be listening more than the other wrestlers right now? Like, what are kind of the expectations in the locker room? Kind of give me a general, just as a little familiarization point for them. We talk about feeling comfortable, we talk about egos and things. Like, what is that atmosphere generally like that we can kind of translate to those fans right now?
Yeah, I'll start a little bit on this because, like, one of the things we've tried to set up at Ryse is to like defy a lot of that in a way. And I want to point this like a story out. It's one of my favorite stories. Was like when I first started, and sort of over the years I've kind of like shied away from like my early days and like naming names because like I never wanted to get into heat, but like at this point I don't care anymore because of everything that's come out over the last week with the places I've worked. But when I first started, and I'll say things at PWX, there was an older club there that kind of ran the locker room. There was a veteran unit, and there was this atmosphere of kind of an old school mentality. And when I first trained and when I was first involved in this is, we're talking like 9 years ago, is when I first started. You definitely were deferent to a lot of these people. You definitely made sure that you shook everyone's hands and did all that type of stuff. And I remember, I can't remember how long I'd been in. I think it'd been less than a year, and I had forgotten or I had missed shaking Brandon Kay's hand. And because Brandon at that time was very, very personal and like wasn't like he changed by himself. He really wasn't hanging out with the locker room, so it was easy to miss him, and I did. And I remember it was later on in the night. I saw him in the room, I think with Quinn, and I like felt that dread that you feel when you've pissed off a veteran. And I remember going in and apologizing to Brandon and saying, "I'm sorry, I missed shaking your hand." And Brandon looked me dead in the eye and said, "Do not ever apologize again. It's not important. It's okay to miss someone." And that changed me a lot. Because here's a guy who is the cornerstone of a company who had worked his entire life to get that respect and then knew he had it, so he didn't need you to bow down to him. It changed how I viewed a lot of stuff. And so when the company first started, I wanted that feeling. Now, when wrestlers show up as the person in charge, shaking hands is a big part of that. And a lot of people say, it's respect. For me, running the show, I like when people shake my hand because I know you're there. And that's big. Like, I know that you're at the building and that I don't need to look for you and that we're okay. The show is going to run smoothly. So that's why I like it. And I don't even need a handshake. I just a acknowledgement that you're here is big for me. Moving aside all of that, the handshake to go home, I think is a garbage tradition and we can all throw it out. This idea that you have to shake everyone's hand when you leave, just leave. It's fine. It's really fine. So there is these like little tiny, traditional things that I have to this day still do. If you're sitting in a chair and a veteran walks in, you're supposed to stand up and give them that chair. It's a sign of respect that they paved the way for you. When a veteran comes up, and this is my own company I run, if a veteran comes up to say goodbye, I stand up to say goodbye to them. This is just little respecting. But the wrestling business is full of these little unknown, rules that people expect that you should know, but never teach you directly. And there is a mentality in an older generation that is cultivated through years and years and years, that if you disobey or if you forget or if you do anything wrong in these little rules that you don't know, you are seen as ungrateful or disrespectful or any of those types of things. And that breeds a culture of fear inside a locker room. And when you have a culture of fear, you have a culture of failure, in my opinion. Because if you're afraid, you're tense and you fail. And I think that's the exact opposite way that you need to run any sort of locker room. Trainers and bookers and promoters, a lot of places have this instilled fear that your spot can be gone at any time with any screw up. And I desperately try to stay away from that feeling at all times, because I think it does lead to people in power abusing that power. If your spot is on the line at any time with any screw up, those people in power can manipulate that and use that against you and can abuse their power. And I think it also just creates bad performances, in my opinion. I think wrestlers get tense. They don't perform as well. They're more worried about screwing up than they are about, just performing. And I think they put on worse performances because of it. And so I think that those little things, slowly but surely, the more we weed those out and more we weed out this fear mentality that people are getting in wrestling, then I think you'll start seeing things migrate to the better.
So when we're talking about this fear, in a lot of these cases that I'm seeing in the Speak Out movement, and Laura and Tyler, if you can speak to this too, it seems that a lot of the I haven't said anything because I was afraid is like, whether it be, and I see this echoed multiple times because of my spot, because of the company, because of this, because of the influence, because of who it was. Like, that seems to echo from, again, it, resonates with that fear just feeds all that from this, correct?
Yeah, it really, I mean, it does. Being worried about a spot, I mean, some people who haven't called, or some people who have done the calling out and stuff like that, wrestling might be the only thing that they have. Like, that's their thing, and they're afraid to talk out because for fear of like losing that one thing that they have. Because if it turns out, there's always, unfortunately, with something like this, there's always a shadow of doubt on either side. And I mean, while that's not something that I really believe that there should be, you shouldn't believe the person accusing you should always believe them. There's the reason why some people, I think, don't come out with it is because they'll see so many times where they're not going to believe, or they say they won't be believed, and that installs the fear, and that's why they do it. So it takes one person to speak. I mean, obviously it took one person to speak out, and then look where we are now. It's like the floodgates opened. And like, back to what Marcus is saying, is like, with that instilled fear of your spot and stuff like that. And it's actually something that was instilled in me. I didn't train in Pittsburgh. I had trained in Massachusetts. It wasn't really instilled in my school, but it was something that I always had that fear of because I heard other wrestlers talk about it, not so much my trainer. I mean, when I did Uprise, I was really nervous, and really, 2 seconds into my match, I hurt myself, and I went through and I came back, and I was upset. It wasn't the fact that I got hurt. I was upset that, because in my mentality, I was scared that I had messed up. I wasn't going to be, not welcome back, but like, at that point, like, I like cost myself a spot because I don't think I performed well. And Marcus came down and he's like, "No, you did fine." And like, I couldn't even tell this. I was like, I mean, I was on tears. I pulled my groin, but I like, that was something that I knew at that point that Ryse didn't have that type of mentality. That's why I like it. That's why I like being there so much, because where I'd come from, it was like, cool, you look like crap out there. They can just be like, you know what, you're done. And even if it's your school or where you trained or whatnot, no, you're done. You're good. We don't want to use you anymore. I didn't feel like that with Ryse at all. Like, I was freaking out, but I was assured, that I was fine and everything like that. And it was really caring, like Morgan and Marcus and everybody, checking up on me, making sure I'm okay, everything like that. And I'm one of those people that I get super nervous about stuff. Like, I'm just making sure I want to go out there and not only do good or be a good representation for the company and the show and everything like that, but also for the fans. And whenever we're always our worst critics. Whenever I screw up, I'm always, hard on myself. But having the locker room there creates such positivity, it really helps. That's why, Ryse does such a good job with it, I think. But
Laura, we've talked a lot on the show and Mayhem show about women's wrestling, and one of the one of the questions I think I ask whenever I have a woman on for the show and your interview, and probably asked you too, was kind of like, what's the vibe out there? What state of women's wrestling is kind of what we usually do. You've been I think at this a little longer than Tyler, if I have my timing correct here. Like, what do you kind of see out there, from a women's perspective in multiple locker rooms? Kind of the breadth of the vibe from locker room to locker room.
Honestly, it could be different from promotion to promotion. It could be night and day, promotion to promotion. I've worked in some really awesome locker rooms besides Ryse. I've worked in some very awesome locker rooms, and they all seem to have a really awesome attitude. OCW is definitely one that was pushing women's wrestling in their area pretty hard and very positive. If a match didn't go well for somebody, for one of the wrestlers there was always, feedback, but it was constructive. Very supportive guys there. I really enjoy working with those guys a great deal. Very respectful. They always made sure that we had spaces that were separated from the guys. And And even if they didn't, they would make it so that we would still have privatized areas for us to get changed and everything else. I see us the same way. Again, very respectful for what we're trying to do. If I ever had to have a match with a girl that we'll say is like less than 20 matches in, which is getting more and more common because there is kind of a mini explosion for women's wrestling right now. The girls I've worked 9 times out of 10 have always been exceptionally respectful, have listened. And the fact that, they came in there with a much more comfortable attitude towards things when I, talk to them and explain to them, like, look, this is, your 11th or 12th match. It's not the end of the world if something wrong happens. Just hang on to me and we'll get through it. It brings the best out of them. And they also have that support from everybody else besides me, which is huge because it's very hard to walk into a locker room and be the only other woman with a younger girl or a newer girl, and you feel like you're on an island. And that, if you screw up in front of the guys, they're going to know that you're not worth being there.
Mm-hmm.
So that was always a mentality that was kind of pushed onto you at the beginning anyway. But now, at least in some of the places that I've worked, it seems to become a lot more relaxed, and we are all equal in that regard. If you have a bad match, you have a bad match. It's not because you're a girl. It's just because, well, things didn't work out. Or if you have a great match, hey, you have a great match. It's not because you're a girl. So that I do see and some really positive changes happening in a few of the locker rooms I've worked. I've worked in some locker rooms where I haven't felt safe. That having another girl there was just almost like, I don't want to say ring the dinner bell, but it felt like that kind of way. And if you ask questions more in detail later, I can give you a couple of stories. I want to make sure we have time to explain everything. But definitely I've been in some locker rooms where, and this has become less and less, which I'm happy about, but it's felt uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So one thing I've seen that kind of shared around it, and I feel bad I didn't bookmark it because I really did want to bring it up on the show, but I've seen these code of conduct sexual harassment policies that I think somebody originally, the first time I saw it, they said this is posted typically in like not restaurants but bars, say, right? And having something like that kind of shared in the pro wrestling backstage space as well, probably even the show, because I mean fans will sometimes overstep boundaries as well, as we've all seen at some point or another. So you guys are already kind of moving towards and already doing a lot of good work to make a safe environment. Like, what with this focus on specific aspects of the locker room, like what are things that you kind of look at or would recommend for promotions, and this is for all of you across the board, to make that safe, to make sure, like, you're not in a situation like Laura just described, in the long run?
I can talk about a little bit over the last week. Brandon, myself, and Christy have reached out to a few people in that respect of getting advice from women in our locker room. And what would you like to see? What would make you feel better? One of the big complaints we've had, and it's something that we're addressing internally, is intermission safety. And that's something that women, particularly, of what has been told to me, is when you're at a merchandising table and a crowd is around you, that's when things can go out of hands with fans and things like that.
Okay.
And that can be a moment where someone who can harass you or something like that in that type of environment. And so something we need to look into, and something we've been guilty of, and I think most wrestling promotions have also been guilty of this, is we aren't training security properly to deal with those situations, to be around in that type of stuff. So if a woman who is, on the show, is a performer, is at a merchandising table and is having an issue, where does she go? Who does she find? How does that get addressed immediately with security? Are they trained properly to deal with that situation? That's something we need to address. I think a lot of places need to address. I think that we do a pretty good job, but we've had complaints as well. So we've had to change things. I know with certain specific women on our roster, which is leaving a show. Fans will hang around. They will creep on you after a show to your car and things like that. So making sure that women who are leaving are, properly protected with security or, anything like that. That is something that we need to look into and make sure that that's a viable solution to people. Also, you got to make sure that when things happen in a locker room, and this is speaking to management side and a wrestler side. So when an incident happens, it needs to be brought to light. And so when I talk about the fear in the locker room, there is this fear sometimes when something happens that they go, well, I don't want to make waves.
Yeah.
And you need to make waves is what I will say. So, but on the other side is management needs to be trusted that you can go to them and that your voice isn't making waves. It's going to be believed and heard. And so, if the issue that I see here is as much as I try to be open and I try to be that person, I feel like people can come to me to say anything. That doesn't necessarily mean that I will be viewed that way, no matter how hard I try. So do you need a third party? Do you need someone that people can go to that they know that they can trust, that will speak on their behalf? That's something to look into and talk about as well. Just to make sure that these types of things are put in place.
Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, so many promotions, the security is just the guys available to, that volunteer for security or things like that. I know we've had problems with that. We'll see an incident in front of us, as the video crew, and be like, there's nobody to take care of this thing, whether it be just a fan interaction or something like that, right? Or with the wrestlers even. So no, that's definitely a good point there. Tyler, I think you were about to say something.
My kind of thing would be having a policy like that, making sure it applies to everyone, not just your non-champion wrestlers, but also your champion wrestlers, because you'll have people that are there that have been there for a while or have been the champion. They're kind of the face of it, and not that I've seen any of that really around here, but you'll have those ones that will think that they're kind of above where they need to be. And I know that comes from paving the way and being around for a while and all that, and being respectful of that, but they also can't be above being called out on it or being reprimanded for it. Some places will, give an exception to it just because that person holds some sort of belt or this or that. I mean, obviously, if AEW and higher echelons of wrestling can do it, there's no reason that with the amount of indie workers that are on the scene, you can't find somebody to either push or replace them. Having that understanding, that would probably be something that would have to change as well, because if you start getting to the point where some people start becoming, beyond reproach about some of this stuff, that's when you run into, problems, and that's when you run into the same thing that we're coming into, that everything's happening now.
Yeah, if I can jump on that real quick. I will say that the last week, for a lot of people, especially local, and I use this term very loosely, it has been easy to call out people that we all don't like. Okay? When there are people that we've all hated or have wronged a lot of people over the years, it's easy to call them out for their garbage. It's a lot harder to call your friends out on this, or people that you like, or people that, I hate to use the phrase, but oh, that's just him. It's very, very hard to call those people out, but those people, eventually, they have to be called out too. And those instances have to be addressed, whether they're champions, whether they're pillars of the community for years, whether they're veterans or things like that. And this will be hard. It will be really, really tough to do because, these people are well liked, or they're well connected, or they're friends with everyone. But that doesn't mean that everyone is innocent just because they're friends with people. That is where this movement gets really, really tough for people, and I think that needs to stay vigilant.
Kind of speaking to that, one part of this, maybe it's not on the locker room side, but we're seeing a lot of fans, wrestlers, kind of being disgusted and saying, "How do I support something like this?" Do you have anything to say about, just to that idea of, what is left that is positive in wrestling? Because it just, in the last week, it seems like there's more and more that isn't.
There's a lot that's still positive wrestling. There's a whole lot. The fact that we are athletes and artists at the same time creating, these just extraordinary storylines, and we're telling a story, and, men and women being able to work together in the ring, for intergender at least, and just being able to, tell a story together. I think that's something that's really positive. I think that we have a platform to do a lot with storytelling. I think that, a lot of wrestling promotions do give back to their local communities. We have been involved in a lot of different charities. We have done a lot of different fundraisers. I think there's definitely a lot that wrestling provides, not only on an artistic basis and an athletic basis, but also, for the community at large. Little kids look up to us for whatever unknown God reason, whatever. But, we do provide a lot as entertainers, as artists, and as athletes. I think there's a whole lot more to even explore. We have not hit our pinnacle yet of what we can do. Is this a systemic issue? I mean, it looks like it has been for quite a long time, but it doesn't mean that we can't fix it.
Yeah, I would say that there's a lot of positives. I think the fact that there has been a subset of wrestling right now that has been so quick to support it and call it out. So, like, if you follow any niche community, and wrestling is a niche community, this is systematic problem in all niche communities. We saw it in Hollywood. We've seen it in music. If you followed it online, the cosplay community deals with this all the time. So when we were looking at code of conduct stuff, one of the first places that got brought to my attention was places like Techo and the code of conduct that they've had to put in place at conventions and things like that, because the cosplay community has dealt with this. Music, movies, TV, video games. This is a systemic problem throughout all of these industries. So for fans that go like, okay, wrestling seems pretty dirty right now, and how can I support this? I really don't want you to like I hate to say this, but like, are you going to watch TV? Are you going to watch movies? Are you going to play video games? Are you going to? All of this is a problem. It's a problem in all areas. And so the idea for me has been, this isn't the time to shy away. I've seen a lot of wrestlers who have been broken down by all of this and said, like, I don't know if I want to be a part of this community. And like, my advice to them is, we need you more now than ever. This is not the time to shy away from this community. This is not the time to go like, my heart's broken, I don't know if I can do this. And I understand that pain for a lot of people, because there's people that they've known for a lot of years that they didn't think have been this bad, and they have come out to be very, very bad people. But we need your fight. We need you in this. We need the best possible people and the best possible role models to step into those voids, step into those training schools, be outspoken about this right now. So your passion for what wrestling was may have been shattered, but let's start developing a passion for what wrestling can be.
And I think there's kind of an angle on this where we can kind of look at, while we have a giant list of dirtbags basically has been provided by the Pro Wrestling Truth movement. I can't remember exactly what that Twitter account is, but we were talking about it Tuesday night on Wrestling Mayhem show. Much like when bad stuff is going down and there's the old Mr. Rogers look for the helpers, that we've been saying since March, with everything going weird around here. I feel like we're seeing the true colors of a lot of people. So look towards the ones that are doing good in the middle of this, correct? The ones that are saying this is not okay. we're going to make this better, like Ryse is doing. We are going to make this better, admit it, and you're doing that in such a aware way that you say we're not, we still have a lot to do, right?
Yeah. So like, I want to use this point real quick, and I don't mean to cut you off, but like, this is where it bothers me slightly, and it's not to criticize your point, but to criticize just maybe the terminology. When we talk about Mr. Rogers and the look for the helpers, that is a message that we give to children.
Yeah.
Okay. So when something is going wrong and a child is scared, we tell them to look for the helpers. The helpers are the adults. If you're an adult, don't look for the helper, be a helper.
Okay.
You need to be a helper and start making these changes. It's not time for you to look to someone else to lead. It's time for all of us to be helpers and lead.
Well said. Well said. Well, with that, Tyler, Laura, do you guys have anything you want to say on the way out here?
I mean, just kind of echoing what Marcus said.
When did you get in a car? When did this happen? Wait a minute.
I've been watching them. I've been watching them roam around.
Getting rushed out. Just to kind of echo what Marcus said, like you have to have people who are going to lead in this. For those that are saying that they want to give up and they don't want to do it anymore and stuff like that because they don't like where it's going. I mean, like it wasn't really going anywhere. It's where it was.
Mm-hmm.
Where it's going is where it's going from here on, from this point on, and that's why we need people like that to stay around, like to be an example, to change the culture, to fix what they see is broken. Giving up on it just doesn't work, and you just don't want to deal with it. It's time to deal with it. It's time to own up to that. And it's time to change. That's the big thing, I think. Like if you are sick of it, something, change it. Be the leader, be out there, be vocal, be smart. That's really what I have to say.
Excellent. Laura?
I mean, yeah. So not to sound jaded or cynical, but I don't know. When I got into this business, I was constantly told to be on my toes, be on my guard, and basically live out a life of paranoia. So, I mean, I knew about people like this existing and not being able to talk about it. So now that it's all kind of been flushed out, I'm just like, well, yeah, there it is. So that's when I hear people like, oh, I want to quit. I can't believe that this is so unbelievable. I can't deal with this. Can I swear, Sorg, or is that a no-no?
That's fine. That's fine.
Oh, great. I want to be like, motherfucker, are you kidding me? I got slapped on the ass at a promotion once. Are you serious?
Mm-hmm.
And I still have to keep going, but this is too much for you to handle? No, this is exactly what was in the room when you walked in. Sometimes you have to stare it right in the face. And now that we have, obtained some, agency over our actions and how we want to see our business progress, now it's time to take the reins and be like, no, that's not appropriate behavior. We're going to fix this.
There you go. Last words, Marcus?
Yeah, I would say, yeah, I gotcha. I would say that over the man, this has just been a wild time. I think so much of what we're hearing now from wrestlers ties in so much directly with the pandemic we're going through.
Mm-hmm.
And I think because, and this is going to sound weird, but I've had this theory. I feel like right now, because there's no wrestling, because everyone's sitting around, no one's afraid to lose a booking. No one's afraid to piss someone off right now. If there's no wrestling, what am I scared of? What am I going to lose?
Yeah.
And so I think that's why people are being more vocal about racism in wrestling, about sexism in wrestling, about homophobia in wrestling, about all this stuff that's happening, is because, man, if I make you angry, what are you going to do? Not bring me back in a year or 6 months when we have shows again or whatever?
Mm-hmm.
I think that part of this, it's taken away that fear in people, which I'm very glad to see. I started talking a little bit about, like, we wanted to be a place where people could speak their voice. And some people are going to be vocal leaders and some people aren't going to be vocal leaders. And we've seen example people and we've seen vocal people. There's people educating out there right now, day in and day out, about racism, about sexism, about homophobia. There is people that are donating time and money on their own account. There's people that are at protests. There's people that are working on their own time to do that type of stuff. Everyone is leading in their own way. And I don't want to make it seem like there's a specific way that everyone should lead right now or people should do things. If your way is to lead by example, then be the best example that you can be. If your way is to educate, then get out there and get on social media and educate. If your way is to organize, then find a way to organize and get money and donate it and that type of stuff. I think everyone has a role to play right now. And as I said on my social media, and I felt this way for a little bit, now is really the time. And I love that I'm saying this as you give me like the last word on the show. Now is the time for people like me, who are straight white men in positions of power, to shut the fuck up and listen to the people that are experiencing these types of things. Listen to what they're telling you and understand what they're telling you and believe what they're telling you, and then work with them to fix these problems. I do not have all the answers. I will never have all the answers. The only thing I can do is listen to people that are experiencing these things. And so for people in my position, which is probably 95% of wrestling promotions are run by people like me, straight white men who do not experience these things in their daily lives. Shut the fuck up. Stop posting, stop commenting, start listening. That's my best advice that I can give anyone right now.
That's a good point to end it on. Again, this is just kind of a start of the conversation, kind of a way to kind of guide things and hopefully get a little bit out there and help everybody understand what's going on, digest what's going on. It's a lot of what we're doing right now. We're not going to solve the issues of the wrestling world in a podcast, unfortunately. But again, continue the conversation. We're having a lot of it on our Wrestling Mayhem Show Facebook group, and of course, a lot of it's happening on Facebook pages, on a lot of your social media accounts and everything as well. So thank you so much. Thank you, Marcus Mann, Tyler Klein, Laura Loveless. Real quick, social medias, Marcus, Tyler, then Laura.
You can find me, Marcus Mann, on Facebook, at Marcus Mann BHS on Twitter, Ryse _wrestling for Ryse's company. We've been very, very quiet because we're letting our wrestlers do the talking right now, but we are supporting everyone that's speaking out.
Absolutely. Tyler? Is he still in the car?
He might have froze on you, Sorg.
Okay, Laura?
I'm on Instagram. Yeah, I'm still here. Trophy Boy Tyler Klein. T-Boy Tyler Klein. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
The _real _Laura _Loveless is on Instagram. Twitter is at Laura _Loveless, and you can find me on Facebook pretty easily.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody. And again, please go check out everything. If you just want to remember the way things were with crowds and when we don't have to worry about this, a lot of wrestling up over at IndyWrestling.us, including everybody here in action in some form with Ryse Wrestling or all across the greater wrestling scene. Thank you guys so much. And until next time, stay safe out there and please support Indy Wrestling and each other. This show is a member of the Sorgatron Media Podcast Network. Find out more at sorgatronmedia.com.